Okay. Uh, can you see my screen? Okay, so I'll just go ahead and start talking. All right. So thank you for inviting me to give a talk at this workshop. I'm really excited about the interdisciplinary taste of the workshop. And as a computer graphics researcher, I hope I have also chosen a somewhat interdisciplinary topic, rethinking differentiable simulation for computational design of robots. So one second. Okay. So this talk is basically a review of our experience with differentiable simulation and its application in robot code design, but slightly tailored to hardware-aware intelligence, the topic of today's workshop. So I'll begin by stating the robot design problem considered in this presentation. For example, consider this 2D biped robot. There are two main factors that affect its performance in downstream applications. So one thing is the body, its body design, which mostly refers to its hardware, for example, the size of its leg and the distance between its joints. And the second factor is its brain, which takes observations from its surrounding environment as input and generates action signals in response. A main focus of my past research is to develop computational methods inspired from computer graphics research, numerical analysis, and machine learning, and occasionally robotics. Developing these computational methods that can discover unconventional robot design with extreme performance or desired performance specified by the user. A typical pipeline considered in my past research sends a brain and body design to a simulator for evaluation, as the flowchart indicates, and adjust the design based on the simulation feedback. If the design is ready in simulation, we then move on to fabricate a hardware prototype. And next, we further adjust the design accordingly to the feedback from hardware experiments if necessary. The iteration loops over and over again until we are satisfied with the robot design. And researchers in graphics and robotics have considered computational methods for many aspects in this pipeline. My talk today focuses on a computational tool named differentiable simulation, which has its early roots in numerical analysis, and it has been revived with the development of more recent numerical simulation methods and numerical analysis tools. A main incentive to equip a standard simulator with differentiability is that simulation can, in this way, be seamlessly integrated into a computational graph where gradients can freely flow to every single node in this graph, which may unlock gradient-based optimization in a wider range of applications. This is also a typical framework in today's in many of today's modern machine learning setups. So my talk will try to cover three topics today. I'll first describe two hardware-aware robot design examples that benefit from differentiable simulation in our past experience. And next, I will discuss our more recent design attempt that causes some challenges for differentiable simulation. And hopefully, I would like to use this to shed some light on the inherent difficulty faced by differentiable simulation in certain scenarios. And lastly, I would like to summarize a few lessons that I have personally learned from our past experience with differentiable simulation in robot code design problems. So let me first introduce two successful examples. I will begin with a relatively old project that uses gradients to discover unconventional multi-copter shape designs. So in this project, we considered a multi-copter with a predefined number of rotors and a fixed topology. The topology refers to how these rotors are connected to each other. We constructed a continuous shape space by varying the location and orientation of these rotors. So the left video here visualizes the shape space by manually varying the continuous shape parameters. And furthermore, we equipped each shape with an LQR controller, which is also parameterized by continuous parameters. The combination of the shape and the controller parameters enable the flight of this multi-copter design in simulation. And our computational method computes gradients with respect to both shape and control parameters from the simulator itself. And the optimization unlocked by these gradients from the simulator turns out to be successful and useful for discovering new designs with better flight performance. This slide shows a concrete example which we aim to explore an unconventional pentacopter design. Pentacopter refers to the fact that this has 5 rotors, and the goal here is to increase its maximum payload. The top left photo shows an initial design proposed by a human expert, a mechanical engineer, and with a strong favor of a symmetric design. And the 5 red arrows indicate the design suggestion from our gradient-based optimizer, which achieves an increase of over 30% payload after optimization. And we further extended the computational design pipeline to other flying robots, including a hybrid design that exploits both fixed wings and rotors. This particular project includes a hardware-compatible part databases from which experienced users can assemble fabricable flying robot designs. The computational design pipeline here trained an end-to-end reinforcement learning controller that is directly deployable to the hardware prototype, which seamlessly exploits the benefits of both fixed wings and rotors whenever necessary. Here's a flight test taken from one particular instance of the design, which has 4 rotors and a pair of fixed wings. Next, I will turn to soft robots and describe how differentiable simulators can be helpful for designing them and optimizing their performance. Building soft body differentiable simulators requires some extra efforts than the previous rigid body counterparts because soft bodies in theory have infinitely many degrees of freedom. Even after numerical discretization, there are still like substantially more degrees of freedom to be taken care of in computation than their rigid body counterparts. But deriving gradients for such soft body differentiable simulators is still tractable. As of today, graphics people know how to compute gradients in a typical soft body simulator, and we can use them to optimize shape and control or material parameters for, say, a virtual agent in simulation. And this slide shows an example of using gradients to optimize a closed loop neural network controller for a starfish to swim up. So let me try to play the video. And the starfish is equipped with a simplified fluid model and 4 groups of muscle fibers. And the muscle fibers are actuated using a closed loop neural network controller. So the left video shows an initial guess of the neural network control parameters. And the right video shows the optimized control parameters where the optimization is done using the gradients computed from the soft body differentiable simulator. And several works extended the application of our soft body differentiable simulator to real-world hardware prototypes. And we have a closely related follow-up project that deploys the optimized physics and control parameters to a soft starfish robot prototype showing in the right video. And we run an optimization loop over the system parameters, including the simplified fluid model and the control parameters, which in this case is an open loop controller. And both gradients are obtained from the differentiable simulator. And after several iterations of optimization with differentiable simulators, our starfish managed to swim at a speed substantially faster than a handcrafted baseline, as shown in the two left photos. And these past projects presented a few successful applications of differentiable simulation in robot code design, covering system identification, shape exploration, and control optimization in somewhat like typical physical systems involving rigid bodies and soft bodies and some simplified fluid models. Next, I will turn to a more challenging case for differentiable simulation and discuss its implication on robot design. And in this project, we consider designing a passive thin shell flyer inspired by winged seeds in nature. These seeds are equipped with very light and large wings. The left photos showed 6 representative wing shapes from these winged seeds, and their unique shapes interact with airflow when they are doing like free falling from the trees. And this interaction between the shape and the airflow automatically triggers self-spinning behaviors, as shown in the right video, which generates thrust like a propeller. And this is beneficial for them because it expands their dispersal range. And our project applies computational methods to explore novel shape designs that hopefully can outperform their natural counterparts in certain performance metrics that we care about. For example, faster spinning rates or longer traversal distance. The pipeline here begins with collecting natural seeds and 3D scanning them to build a data set and from which we span a continuous shape space. Next, for each new shape proposed in this shape space, we evaluate their flying performance in a fluid simulator. More specifically, here we use a lattice Boltzmann fluid simulator with immersed boundary methods for solid fluid coupling. These performances are collected by a learning-based optimizer to refine the shape design. And finally, we create paper replica of these optimized shapes and test their flight performance. So the overall pipeline here is computational. Like in previous projects, we have considered adopting a differentiable fluid or solid fluid simulator to enable full gradient flow in the whole pipeline. However, it turns out that differentiable simulation here struggles in this particular scenario. And this is actually explainable. One challenge comes from the flying motion's sensitive dependency on a seed's initial condition. While it may not be difficult to reproduce qualitatively the spinning motion from repeated experiments, both in simulation and in the real-world flight test. It turns out that it is quite challenging, but understandable to ensure a quantitative alignment among these repeated experiments due to their sensitivity on the initial conditions, like how these seeds are released. So this naturally leads to a very chaotic objective landscape as shown in the two figures below. The horizontal axis here represents an interpolation parameter that controls the seed's shape in simulation. And the vertical axis here computes an objective of interest related to the flight performance over a long time horizon. So the procedure is that we first determine an interpolation parameter, which generates the shape of the thin shell, which might be novel or might be unseen from our data set. And then we send this thin shell to the fluid simulation and gather its flight behavior. And then we calculate a particular performance metric of interest, which becomes the vertical axis, the objective. And as the figure shows, the objective here is quite sensitive to very small changes in the shape parameter, as can be seen from the zoom-in version of the energy landscape, objective landscape, which can clearly exhibit very bumpy ups and downs. And this questions whether gradients in this particular simulation are still well defined, or whether they are still useful for downstream applications or optimization. So observing that this technical difficulty is a consequence of the inherently intricate physics in both fluid dynamics and solid fluid coupling, here we decide to abandon the deterministic view, which has been typically applied in our past experience with differentiable simulators. And instead, we tried to consider a more stochastic model. So here's the detail. Given a shape design specified by its parameters and the initial condition, for example, the pose when the seed is released, we use a simulator which takes as input from them and then evaluate its flight performance. And this forms an objective as a function of the shape parameter which we try to explore. And note that here, in the deterministic view, the initial conditions is frozen. And our proposed modification to this canonical pipeline is that we assign a probability distribution to characterize the randomness in the initial condition. So S0, the initial conditions, is no longer fixed, but we presume it obeys a certain distribution, and we use Gaussian as an example. And accordingly, the optimization objective is no longer deterministic, but also randomized. And we optimize the expectation of this objective, which smoothes out the objective landscape as shown in the previous slides. And furthermore, to avoid the ill-defined gradients, we used a neural network as a surrogate model that uses its gradients for optimization. And the simulator itself does not need to be differentiable in this case. Instead, it can be any standard like forward simulator as long as it can offer reliable estimate or evaluation for the flight performance. And the above pipeline has successfully discovered some interesting shapes with unconventional flying behaviors. The left two videos here demonstrate the airflow around a natural seat and an optimized one in simulation. Notice that these are viewed from the body frame of the seat. So when the seat is doing a free fall, the airflow is actually flowing past the seat from the bottom direction, from bottom to top. And the blue and red lines here indicate slow and fast airflows respectively. So blue indicates a slower speed, so the wind seat is falling more gracefully. And the video here suggests that the shape proposed by our computational method establishes a much faster rotational speed, leading to a slower falling that may be favored in downstream applications. And the right figures show that we can also optimize winded seats for other performance metrics, like for a longer traveling distance. We then move on to flight tests in the real world. So the left photo here overlays about 15 consecutive frames of falling from releasing an initial seat design. And the right figure shows its optimized counterparts. The comparison here confirms that the optimized seat has a faster rotational speed and slower falling. We repeated this experiment for 5 times and reported their statistics on the right table. The optimized design is consistently better with variations in its performance, which also confirms the sensitivity of its motion and justifies our claims on on the challenges faced by the differentiable simulation in this particular scenario, which is primarily due to the intricate nature of the physics models involved, like in fluid dynamics and in solid fluid coupling. Finally, I would like to summarize my talk with a few takeaways from these projects. So I'm going to present this figure first. This figure sorts physics simulators based on their physical complexity from left to right. The leftmost one indicates rigid body simulation. Rigid body systems can be simulated very efficiently using modern algorithms and hardware as of today. They have like a relatively small number of degrees of freedom. And moving on to the right, soft bodies require more advanced constitutive models, and they involve more degrees of freedom, requiring like more computational budget. And fluids introduce much more sophisticated physics that is still not fully understood today. And fluid simulation requires even more advanced numerical methods to solve their motions. And finally, on top of all these like individual physical systems, there's also multi-physics simulators or multi-phase simulators, which couple more than one physics models. For example, this soft fish swimming in water. And this coupling adds another layer of complexity. A general pattern we have experienced in our past projects is that computing gradients is closely related to simulating the physical systems itself. Like if you and in particular, the difficulty of obtaining the gradients is also highly dependent on the difficulty of computing the forward simulation. In particular, as the physical complexity increases from left to right, we have experienced more and more numerical and technical challenges to compute or sometimes even define a proper gradients from a simulator. And a less reliable gradient from, say, a fairly complicated forward simulator is, of course, not completely useless, but such gradients should be used with great care. And our past experiences suggest a few factors that I think may help users calibrate their expectation of a differentiable simulator's capability in downstream applications. The first pair of factors that I would like to talk about is deterministic versus stochastic modeling. On one hand, deriving analytical gradients for a deterministic physical system is perhaps more straightforward and more procedural. Like people can apply adjoint equations and backpropagation, and also and even use autodiff tools. On the other hand, introducing stochastic modeling regularizes gradients, as shown in the Winded Seas project. This is tractable because stochastic modeling smoothes out the landscape of the underlying dynamics to some extent. And the second factor that I would like to talk about is local and global optimization. Gradients encourage faster local convergence rate in theory when and if there is a good initial guess close enough to the local minimum. But it also struggles to like it may also suffer from getting trapped into this local minimum. And on the other hand, gradient-free methods are less prone to local minima and might be better off for exploring like a globally optimal results. And finally, it remains very unclear to myself whether gradients from a differentiable simulator are well-defined or whether they are useful for a long time horizon physics process. So for a large portion of the differentiable simulators and their applications that we have seen these days, the time horizon considered depends on the complexity of the physical systems, but in general, they are not super long. And as the physical process gets longer and longer, the gradients backpropagate through every single time step, and the errors accumulate, and it's getting less and less clear how this can be defined in a proper way, or whether they are still like they still remain useful. Okay, so these takeaways conclude my talk. And for more details, please feel free to see the paper, code, and data on my homepage. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
Do we have questions from the audience?
Can we try to disable I think I can hear you with lots of echoes, but I can hear you.
Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, with some delay and echoes.
An option might be to turn off the room sound.
Yeah, we are trying to turn off the room sound.
Wait,
Can you hear now? Because the room is off.
Okay, can you hear us still?
Yes, it's getting better now.
Oh, okay, good. I
Great,
think we have a
great.
solution.
Mute
Okay,
that
great.
one. So,
you can mute that one.
Yeah, so is the sound on the laptop?
Yes.
Yes.
Any questions?
Yes, please. Could you come?
Oh,
Should I walk over there?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that.
We're having issues with the sound.
No, actually, no. It's
Thank you for the talk. It was very, very interesting. I have many questions. I don't want to monopolize, but I have a list. So stop me. So I'm really interested in this idea of parameterizing the shape optimization, right? So you gave your first example seemed like a fairly well-behaved parameter space. It was like basically lengths or XY coordinates of the drone and where
Yes.
the propellers would mount on the drone.
Yes.
The second example you gave with the seeds is a little more sophisticated. You had this library of 3D shapes, and then you sort of interpolated those 3D shapes for your parameterization. My question is, how many free variables are in that interpolation? Is that just like a simple dilation operation from the original 3D shapes to these interpolated shapes, or what's actually happening there?
For the winded seeds or for the multicopters?
For the wind seeds.
Okay, so the winded seeds are organic surfaces. There are 55 seeds in the data set. So I think we are using like maybe 10 representative ones to do the interpolation. So to answer your question about the degrees of freedom, it's like about 10 parameters controlling the shape. And how the interpolation is done is slightly more sophisticated. It's based on some advanced mathematical tools from Lie groups and Lie algebra and differential geometry. So the I let me try to give a short explanation on this. So the challenge is that these are organic surfaces, so we unify their representation by hallucinating there is an evolution trajectory that evolves a unit disk to a particular winded seeds. And there are some variational principles guiding us to find this hallucination. And the interpolation happens between these trajectories. So this is a very high level answer.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. I have other questions, but
if there's no other question, you can ask another one.
all right. Yeah, so you also mentioned for the third project, the seed project, you mentioned using a surrogate model because you couldn't run basically the fluid structure interaction model many times and get your optimization loop in that. So how do you set up this surrogate model? How is it trained based on the simulator?
So the simulation is okay. It can generate reliable performance metrics or evaluations for the winded seeds, and it's relatively fast. The question is, the challenge is that the gradients used for optimization is not very well defined because of the chaotic nature of the simulator. So the surrogate model takes the same inputs as the simulator, and it tries to fit or at some point overfit the expectation of the objectives. And what we are trying to exploit is the gradients from the surrogate model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I guess the last point I had is, in general, how would you approach co-design of like a robot controller and a body, right? There's a lot of different variables. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can try to train things literally in parallel, or you can, optimize morphology, incrementally train a controller, go back to optimizing the morphology, and sort of do the sequential process. So what would be a suggestion for like a best way to approach this co-design?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't think I have a good answer for that. So my past experience seems to be very case by case, and it's indeed difficult to imagine a unified or a universal solution to co-design of, say, any robot problems.
All right, great.
So I don't really have a good answer, unfortunately.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you please go to the
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, thanks for the talk. I have only one question. I think physics gradient is really a promising approach, but I'm a bit concerned about the sim to real gap. I mean, in one of my projects, I work on deformable bodies, but the thing is, I know co-design is majorly, mostly performing in simulation because it's hard to do co-design. And if we rely too much on simulation, how do we, approach this sim to real problem? It might be optimal in simulation, but when we roll out in real world, the gap in dynamics could be, a real problem. Do you have any opinions about this problem?
That's also a great question, which unfortunately I also don't have a definitive answer. I have some past experience with sim-to-real gaps, so I can provide some random thoughts from my previous experience. So the first like comment is that I think from the graphics community there are like a relatively like diverse set of simulators with different like focus on the trade-off between speed and accuracy and maybe other metrics. So if we wish to find very like physically plausible simulators for say fluids or deformable solids, there are certain like options, but they will typically be much slower than what like robotics or machine learning community are familiar with. And the second comment is that there are certain like physical like phenomena that are very difficult to differentiate, and they are also sometimes they are also causing larger sim-to-real gaps than other factors. One thing that I personally feel may cause a large sim-to-real gap, say for example in rigid bodies, is contact and collisions and frictions. So this is like one culprit in some of our previous projects when we try to narrow the sim-to-real gap. And I think another possible like source of or typical like factor for large sim-to-real gaps that I personally experienced is in like anything related to very turbulent fluids or flow. This is like very difficult to, or sometimes I even question myself whether it still makes sense to quantitatively match these results because of their intricate nature. But again, I think in general, I unfortunately do not have a very like comprehensive answer for how to narrow the sim to real gap, and I guess we'll have to do this case by case.
All right, thank you so much.
I guess we'll move to the next speaker. So if you have questions,